A US Navy seaplane slams into the Antarctic ice, swallowed by a blizzard. 3 servicemen vanish. Weeks later, Admiral Richard Byrd, America's most celebrated polar explorer, warns of enemy fighters from the poles. What did he mean, and what did his men really encounter in Antarctica? To find out, we rewind to 1947 and the largest Antarctic mission in history. The year is 1947. World War II has ended, but a new conflict is brewing. The United States and Soviet Union, once allies, now eye each other with growing suspicion. The atomic age has dawned, and both superpowers are racing to secure strategic positions across the globe. In this tense climate, the US Navy announces a scientific expedition to Antarctica, but the scale is puzzling. 4,700 men, 13 ships, dozens of aircraft, officially a scientific expedition. But here's the problem. No scientific mission needs an aircraft carrier, submarines, and destroyers. This was military through and through, and if it was really just about science, why cloak it in so much firepower? At the helm stands Admiral Richard Byrd, America's most decorated polar explorer. By 1947, Byrd was already legendary. He had flown over both poles, established the first Antarctic research base, and mapped vast regions previously unknown to mankind. His 5 expeditions had earned him the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and international acclaim. When Byrd spoke about polar regions, the world listened, which makes what happened next all the more disturbing. The goals, on paper, were simple. Test gear in extreme cold, set up a base, and map the continent. But analysts, especially in Moscow, saw something more. Antarctica covers 10% of Earth's land. Whoever controls it controls untapped resources, southern shipping routes, and global positioning. The timing wasn't coincidental. Just 2 years earlier, German U-boats had surrendered in Argentina after Hitler's defeat. Intelligence reports suggested some Nazi officials had escaped to South America, and German interest in Antarctica was well documented. The Third Reich had sent its own expedition there in 1938, claiming territory they called New Swabia. For American military planners, the question was obvious. What were the Germans looking for in Antarctica? And did they find it? And this is where the story starts to shift from strategy into mystery. But then, the mission collapsed almost overnight. Byrd planned for 8 months. He lasted 2. On March 5, 1947, Operation Highjump was cut short by 6 months. Official reason: bad weather. But Byrd was the world's top Antarctic expert. He had led multiple polar missions. He knew the weather, something else was at play, and the cost was real. On January 30th, 1947, a PBM Mariner seaplane nicknamed George I went down in a sudden whiteout. The blizzard struck with brutal force, coating wings in ice and tearing visibility to zero. The aircraft slammed into the ice field, snapping apart on impact. 3 men, including Wendell K. Henderson, were killed instantly, but others survived the crash. Their ordeal is one of the most haunting in polar history. Injured and frostbitten, the survivors staggered through the wreckage, shielding themselves against hurricane-force winds. For 13 days, they endured the merciless cold before rescue teams finally found them. The rescue itself was remarkable. In conditions that would normally ground all aircraft, pilots from the USS Pine Island flew dangerous search patterns over the endless white. When they finally spotted the survivors' makeshift camp, they dropped emergency supplies. A ground team then embarked on a treacherous journey across crevasse-filled ice to reach the downed airmen. The mission's logs describe the rescue as miraculous, but they're suspiciously silent about what the George I was doing when it crashed. Official reports called it a tragic accident, but questions remain. Why was the Mariner flying that particular route? Was it really caught off guard by the storm, or diverted towards something it wasn't supposed to find? To this day, the details remain locked in classified files. So was this just bad luck, or a glimpse at something the Navy never wanted revealed? And then came Byrd's statement, the one that still rattles historians. Just days after Operation Highjump's premature conclusion, Byrd traveled to Chile. The expedition's abrupt end had already raised eyebrows in South America, where nations had their own interests in Antarctic territory. Chilean reporters pressed Byrd for details. What they got instead was a warning that would echo for decades. In Chile, Byrd told El Mercurio, the United States must take defensive actions against enemy fighters coming from the polar regions. Enemy fighters from Antarctica. Byrd wasn't a man prone to exaggeration. He was a decorated admiral, a pioneer of polar aviation. Either he had seen something, or he was silenced before he could explain. When his words hit South American newspapers, speculation exploded. Chilean and Argentine journalists hinted at secret German bases, experimental aircraft, even leftover Nazi technology buried under the ice. In the public eye, Byrd's warning was a bombshell. But the bigger question is this: if Byrd was exaggerating, why classify the mission at all? The international press seized on Byrd's comments. In Argentina, where many German expatriates had settled after the war, newspapers ran front-page stories questioning whether Hitler's scientists had established a Fourth Reich under the ice. European outlets speculated about advanced weapons testing. Even in the United States, where wartime censorship habits still influenced reporting, magazines like Popular Mechanics ran articles about the strange circumstances of Highjump's conclusion. But back in Washington, the story shifted. The Pentagon downplayed Byrd's remarks, insisting Operation Highjump had been a success. Official reports stressed mapping achievements, not threats. Thousands of pages of data and aerial photographs were quietly classified, and Byrd himself was reassigned. The classification was sweeping. Not just operational reports, but weather data, crew interviews, and even routine maintenance logs were sealed. When researchers later filed Freedom of Information Act requests, they received heavily redacted documents, sometimes entire pages blacked out. One Navy photographer who served on Highjump later claimed his most significant images were confiscated before the ships even returned to American waters. The contradiction was glaring: a visibly shaken admiral abroad and a calm, dismissive military at home. To researchers, that kind of mixed messaging isn't just suspicious, it's a red flag. And here's the twist: within a decade, the world agreed. Antarctica would never host armies again. In 1959, world powers signed the Antarctic Treaty. No military, no weapons, no sovereign claims. During the Cold War, that kind of cooperation was unheard of. The treaty wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. For the first time in history, nations voluntarily agreed to demilitarize an entire continent. The United States, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, France, Japan, and 7 other countries all signed. They agreed to ban military bases, weapons testing, and nuclear explosions across Antarctica. They suspended all territorial claims, and most surprisingly, they opened their Antarctic facilities to mutual inspection, something neither superpower would allow anywhere else on Earth. If Antarctica was truly just ice and penguins, why would world powers rush to lock it down so completely? Think about it. This was the same era when the United States and the Soviet Union were testing hydrogen bombs, racing to space, and clashing over Berlin. Nuclear brinkmanship was the daily reality. Washington and Moscow agreed on almost nothing, and yet, when it came to Antarctica, bitter rivals suddenly cooperated. No nukes, no troops, just science. Why? What did they fear about this continent that made peace more valuable than power? Some point to Nazi expeditions in the 1930s and rumors of New Swabia. Others focus on Byrd's discovery of vast ice-free valleys and strange geological formations. Conspiracy theorists imagine advanced technology buried beneath the ice. The Nazi connection isn't entirely fictional. German explorer Captain Alfred Richer did lead the 1938 to 1939 New Swabia expedition, claiming 230,000 square kilometers of Antarctica for Hitler's Reich. They mapped the region extensively and established bases, ostensibly for whaling, but with clear military personnel involved. After Germany's defeat, many Nazi scientists were indeed brought to America through Operation Paperclip. Could some have shared information about Antarctic discoveries that prompted Highjump? Historians dismiss the wilder claims, but the facts don't vanish. Highjump was the largest polar expedition ever. It ended 6 months early, multiple men died, and Byrd warned of a threat from the poles. So are we looking at Cold War strategy, or a cover-up that still holds? Today, Antarctica remains Earth's most mysterious continent. Despite decades of scientific presence, less than 1% of its land has been explored on foot. Satellite imagery has revealed massive structures beneath the ice, most explained as natural formations, but some defying easy classification. In 2001, researchers discovered Lake Vostok, a massive freshwater lake sealed under ice for 15 million years. What might live in those isolated waters? The questions continue. If this was only about science, why does the story still feel half-told? Maybe Operation Highjump was just a Cold War flex, a show of power in the world's last frontier. Or maybe Byrd and his men saw something extraordinary, something governments still keep hidden. If Antarctica hides secrets this deep, what else has history buried just out of sight? Drop your theories in the comments. And if you're ready for more untold history, subscribe for the next mystery.